The Philippine Coast Guard has now accused its Chinese counterpart of firing water cannons at its vessels and blocking them in the disputed South China Sea. It said that this has happened when its ship was escorting boats carrying supplies for Filipino soldiers stationed at one of the contested Spratly Islands. China has not publicly commented yet on this incident. However, in a statement, the Philippines Coast Guard said that the incident happened on Saturday as its vessels were heading to the Second Thomas Shoal in the Spratly Islands. It has described China's actions as quote-unquote excessive and unlawful, adding that they also violated international law. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of State has also voiced its support for its Filipino allies. It said, and I quote, firing water cannons and employing unsafe blocking maneuvers, Chinese ships have interfered with the Philippines' lawful exercise of high seas freedom of navigation and jeopardized the safety of the Philippines' vessels and crew. The U.S. has condemned Beijing's quote-unquote dangerous actions, also blaming Chinese maritime militia for this incident. But why is the South China Sea so crucial? It is estimated that these waterways host $5 trillion of global trade every year. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development estimates that over 21% of global trade, amounting to $3.37 trillion, transitioned through the South China Sea waters in 2016. It is also home to rich fishing grounds that provide for livelihoods to millions of people across the region. Imagine more than half of the world's fishing vessels operate in the South China Sea. China has historically ignored all international arbitrations, ruling that its claim to almost the entire South China Sea is ill-founded. China claims by far the largest portion of the territory in the area demarcated by its so-called 9-dash line. The line comprises 9 dashes which extend hundreds of miles south and east from its most southerly province of Hainan. Beijing says that it has rights to this area which go back centuries to when the Paracel and Spratly Islands were regarded as integral parts of the Chinese nation. Meanwhile, its neighbor Vietnam hotly disputes China's historical accounts, saying that China never claimed sovereignty over the islands before the 1940s. Vietnam, meanwhile, says that it has actively ruled over both the Paracels and the Spratly since the 17th century and says that it also has documents to prove so. Other major claimants to the area is Philippines, which is of course in news today, as it invokes its geographical proximity to the Spratly Islands as the main basis of its claims for part of the grouping. Malaysia and Brunei also have laid claims to the territories in South China Sea that they say fall, of course, within its exclusive economic zone as defined by the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or the UNCLOS. Brunei, of course, does not lay any claim to the disputed islands, but Malaysia claims a small number of islands in the Spratlys. What do the latest developments actually mean? We try to take this conversation forward with our experts. Joining me on the broadcast is Ambassador Deepak Vora, Major General A.K. Sivach. I also have with me on the broadcast Vijay Kranti, and we have with us Robindra Sachdev. Let me begin this with Mr. Vijay Kranti, if I may. Mr. Kranti, Philippines has actually shared a video of what has happened in the South China Sea, literally water cannons being used against a smaller Filipino boat that was trying to make some supplies reach its Coast Guard in areas that it believes lawfully belong to the Philippines. What do you make of these developments, sir?
In this whole development is that China considers and claims that the entire South China Sea is China's sea. China has a very strange kind of
defining things and making claims. So on one side, it says that the entire South China Sea is China's sea. And in the same breath, it has been claiming, when talking of Indian Ocean, that Indian Ocean is not India's ocean. So it doesn't belong to India. And as far as South China Sea is concerned,
it is only China who can do such a funny thing that they have drawn a very imaginary line in around this South China Sea on the waters, which it believes is a real line. They call it 9-dash line, and sometimes it is called 11-dash line, which covers entire South China Sea, and it goes even beyond those areas, which are exclusive economic zones of many countries, like there is Vietnam, like there is Brunei, and Malaysia, Philippines. So this what particular event which has happened in the economic zone, exclusive economic zone of Philippines, where the Chinese have you have given all the details how they behave with the vessels of Philippines, and this only shows what in Hindi you use the term dadagiri. China behaves like the owner of entire South China Sea, and their claims are so funny. That not only that they have put claims on those hundreds of islands and even some rocky, jettings, which are very small areas or very not even called islands. These are a few rocks in the South China Sea, and what China has done in recent years, they have went to those areas. They did the local sea digging and filled up those rocky areas and expanded them to such extent that they have come up with airfields on those artificial islands, and where they have stationed their navy, their air force, and they are claiming that now the areas around even those so-called artificial islands also belong to China. And that only shows that China is bent upon creating problem not only for Taiwan in this area, but also far beyond the area which they have, the area like Brunei, which is more than 2,000 kilometers from the nearest shore of China. Philippines, the areas which China is claiming their areas, the areas are far more than 2,000 kilometers from the nearest shore of China. So this only shows that China has number one, long-term designs, and secondly, it wants its own way. It has its own rules which it wants the world to follow. And the basic rule is wherever China claims that this area, this sea or this island or this place is China's, so it belongs to China and nobody should object to it. So what I'm seeing that what is happening in Philippines is simply that philosophy of China, and it may create serious problems. If such events escalate, then maybe even by mistake, there could be escalation which may go beyond control of many countries, and it may turn out into a dirty war.
Absolutely. Ambassador Deepak Vohra, do you believe that somewhere China has probably also assessed the sort of support, say, the Western world has shown to a Ukraine, which they said that Ukraine has our full backing, but they've seen that Russia has managed to continue the war despite so many Western nations extending its support to Ukraine. So do you believe somewhere assessing the outcomes of the war, China is also perhaps now taking, or at least hinting that, listen, we're also ready to take our chances?
Thank you very much, ma'am. Always a pleasure to be on NewsX in the afternoon. I've listened to Mr. Vijaykanti, there's Mr. Sajdev to come and General Sivaj. They know so much more about the world than I do. By the way, greetings from very far away. You're all going to be covering this particular country where I'm at the moment. Let me just put it to you like this. I absolutely, Vijaykanti sahab, I love the Chinese. हमारे सो वो पत्थरों के साथ और लकड़ियों के साथ लड़ते हैं, Philippines के साथ पानी से लड़ते हैं. Great fighters. Look at the kind of weaponry they use. These guys live in the 6th century. These idiots in Beijing. Let me tell you something, ma'am. China has twin problems of anger management and ego management. Let me go to China and Philippines. Give me a moment. Not too long ago, there used to be a boxer who was president of the Philippines, a character. I knew him, Eduardo Duterte. And at some point, there was some conference in China, and he said, you know, ping pong understands what Philippines wants. I love ping pong. He's the only guy who's a friend of China. After that came that ruling on the disputed islands, where the International Tribunal said it all belongs to the Philippines, not to China. And suddenly it became, I hate ping pong. And then China said, listen, ping pong, we loved you. Listen, Duterte, we loved you till yesterday, but today you are our sworn enemy because the International Tribunal has ruled in your favor. China's problem here is an inability to accept anything that conflicts with its interests. So they describe that ruling as a scrap of paper, as a piece of paper. What is going to happen, ma'am? You're right that China thinks that Russia will do what it wants and China can copy that template that the Russians have established. China is being stupid. Russia still has some friends. China has none, not even the people of China. They don't like the Communist Party anymore. That is the major difference. But who's going to tell Dingling that, buddy, you have no clothes? Are tu to nanga hai Shahenshah? Wo jo tere ko thak gaye hain sab log. You have no clothes at all. The emperor is naked. So that is the issue that faces us now. I don't think this is going to result in a kinetic confrontation. The Philippines, as you know, have been buying some weapons, some missiles from India. That again is a message to China that they have friends. We have come out for the first time, ma'am, under the present government in India, and said the world should respect the decisions that are taken by UN bodies and so on. It was meant to be a slap in the face of China. This is what we are seeing happen in the Philippines, using water, etc., fighting over some remote reefs and shoals and so on, is a sign. Number one, China cannot be trusted. Number two, China does not recognize any kind of international law. And three, China is on auto-destruct. No one is there to save it.
Right, absolutely. So I'll come back to you. Let me bring in Major General A.K. Sivach as well. Major General Sivach, what do you make of this latest tactic employed by China? Because clearly it is a violation of international laws. But once again, China proves that the laws that have been set by, say, the UN or any other international authority, it doesn't really care about.
Absolutely. Devika, there is no doubt about it. See, as far as China is concerned, it makes its own rule. And as far as international rules are concerned, international court rules are concerned, it follows none. And there is no doubt, as it has been brought down, that South China Sea, which is about 1.2 million square mile, and which is very rich in the natural resources, oil, gas, and 30 to 40% of the world trade goes. By making an artificial island and creating a 9-dash line, it is claiming the complete economic zone and all the island, majority of the island which are there, of their own. So that is what China is. And China do not follow or respect any verdict which is given by international court, especially the one which was given in 2016, permanent court on arbitration in favor of Philippines. It refused to follow. The point today is, how do we cow down China? You know, all these small countries which are there, whether it is Philippines, Brunei, Laos, Malaysia, or Indonesia, they are not capable of fighting themselves against China, and also they are totally economically dependent on China, and therefore they cannot venture to challenge China, and China is making full use of it. Remember, in Spratly Island, it has taken almost everything from there. It has a problem with even Japan in East China Sea, Senkaku Island. So the point is, that's why this the Quad was also formed. Basically, the principle of Quad was free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific. Freedom of navigation, rule-based international order, maintaining territorial integrity and sovereignty of all nations, including minor island nations. But China follows nothing. China does what it does because what it suits. But China is very alert and alive and very clever. You know, whenever it has to take action, it takes action in a gross tactics, that it does not violate to an extent where the treaty come into play, like the one which Philippines and the US of 1951, that is a mutual treaty of cooperation. The Article 4 says that in case there is a violation, the America will help the Philippines. But they are very smart. They have not used weapon. They only use the cannon, basically water cannon. And they have gone to Ranai Reef, which is a garrison of Philippines, which is also in an economic zone. So the question comes that the way China is growing its size in South China Sea, it is a cause of concern for not only the countries which are there in this part of the world, but also to everyone in the world, because the trade goes from there, and the way that China is expanding its footprints even in Indian Ocean, it is a cause of concern for India also. And that is why this Quad was formed and AUKUS was formed. And AUKUS is basically Australia, UK and US. But nothing has able to deter China so far. China is doing what it is doing, but time has come that you must able to challenge the hegemony of China. And I suppose now you will find it USA trying to take a lead. And that's what it has encouraged, that it is the type of exercise which it is doing all around Taiwan, putting tremendous pressure to cow down. So therefore, it looks like that as on today, China is really not bothered neither about US or any other country in Indo-Pacific, nor it is bothered to implement any ruling which is given by an international court oblique forum. So therefore, there is a requirement the world to come together and challenge this hegemony of China and call spade a spade, because all these smaller countries do not have courage and guts to follow the international justice by standing themselves. Therefore, US must come out and try to help them out. Otherwise, China will do what China is doing at present. Devika.
Okay, all right. Rabindra Sachdev, do you believe that the US, given what we've also discussed recently about how they've not really managed to deter Russia as far as the Ukraine war is concerned, do you think that the US then still holds the key or the cards to securing the South China Sea, or at least ensuring that China doesn't continue with its avatars and misadventures?
Thank you, Devika. Pleasure to be with you. Amen. So much well said by our colleagues earlier. To your point, US not only holds the key, US is the key, and there is only one key in the South China Indo-Pacific which can counter and push back China. Who else can do it? It can only be the US. Yes, as General Sivaj said, in partnerships, in coalitions, or as Ambassador Vora and Bejeji all have been saying that US is building up its partnership in this region, big picture. Second, with Philippines, what's happening, we could look back a few months ago. Philippines has provided now 4 more military bases to America in the month of April. They were provided, I think, earlier, but in April it was announced the locations of these new bases. Philippines already had 5 bases, 4 more have been added, which will be used by the US Army, US Air Force, US Navy. Okay, what the US is doing is, in the Indo-Pacific region, it has realized that in case of a conflict, right, it will need to marshal its resources from one place to other, run around quick hither, right. So US is identifying strategic locations, strategic islands, where it can be setting up its own bases or its partner bases, which can then be utilized for the entire logistics in case of a conflict whenever would be needed. The US has come around to understanding that it cannot counter by only having the Guam base with heavy long distance weapons, having only the Okinawa base with long distance weapons, missiles, whatever, and warships. US is now going out deeper in a certain sense, right, and identifying locations and creating more bases. So that's what's happening on the ground with the US. Now, with respect to Philippines, so one, the Philippines has signed up and agreed to, having 4 more military bases for the US. So if you look, part of it could be China's, and I do think China's signaling. This is the water cannon incident. I think a month or 2 ago, only you carried the story at NewsX, I think, or others. There were, lasers which were being shot across to blind the Filipino Coast Guards in the same location, in the same shoals, Second Thomas Shoals or whatever, etc. Right? So they were blinding the Filipino Coast Guard or the Navy a few months ago. Now this is water cannons. This is much more closer. You can shine, shimmer from maybe miles away. But for a water cannon, maybe you really need to be very close, as is it. So these incidents from China to me indicate that China is, partly, of course, its usual, expansionist, egoist, my way or the highway self, but partly it's expressing its let's say, displeasure with Philippines for signing up for these new military bases, which they have signed up with the United States. So that's where it is. It's a contest which is going, I think. China is putting up its bases, and it's like chess pieces everybody is arranging right now in preparation of something which could, good probability of which is there, will come. When it comes in how many years is another matter, but this is what's happening in the Indo-Pacific that we see.
Right, absolutely. Mr. Vijay Kranti, what do you make, sir, of where the future is headed? Do you also believe that the US holds the key, or do groupings like the AUKUS and Quad now need to do more than just making some statements?
You know, one thing is very sure, that America has suddenly started realizing that China is no more a small fry, that China is a serious threat to the supremacy of America itself. And this is what has motivated America to become so active in recent years. As Ravinder very rightly pointed out that, the kind of arrangements, the basis arrangements they have done with Philippines, America has come up and made Quad very active, started new AUKUS, and then with individually all the countries which are suffering because of China, America is developing one-to-one relations. So that shows that America's realization that China is a serious threat, and that America cannot handle it alone on its own, and that America needs friends and allies. So I think this is a little positive development which can finally check the rogue behavior of China, and let us see how much it works.
Right, absolutely. Ambassador Vora, same question to you, sir. What do you make of as far as the role of the US is concerned, and at the same time, the roles of countries like Japan, Australia, India, who, whether we like it or not, we are actually far more affected by developments in this region than the US?
The United States is everybody's neighbor, ma'am. He's across the world. And if you and I and Mr. Kranti and Mr. Sachdev and General Sivaj had to choose between the United States and China, giving where our hearts are, where our minds are, the democratic world, whatever, America is a broken society internally, etc., etc., etc. Given half a chance, we would choose the United States, and I speak for the rest of the world. Given half a chance, 90% of Chinese would run off to the United States. They don't want to stay in their own country. So what I make of this is a desperate, stupid attempt by the Chinese. Ma'am, it's an aging society, it's an old nation because of their stupid one-child policy. General Sivaj, you can build a aircraft carrier every day. Who's going to man it? Me? I'm 72 years young. I don't think I'll be able to survive on an aircraft. Who have the Chinese got? Will they give it to the North Koreans, or will they give it to somebody else? No, sir. All this hawa that is being created is meaningless. The United States, the day it decides, maybe a decadent society, maybe declining, whatever, the day it decides to take on the Chinese in the South China Sea with its friends Japan and Vietnam and South Korea and so on, it's going to do that. And remember, sir, Mr. Sajdev, you know this, General Sivaj, you know this, all of China's industrial area is on its eastern seaboard. And then starting with Australia at the bottom, you have New Zealand, you have South Korea, you have Vietnam, you have the Philippines, you have everybody and his grandmother and Taiwan. We can block that immediately. And India is hovering around saying, buddy, don't get into Malacca. So what China is doing is not an exercise, a demonstration of its power. It's a demonstration of its desperation.
Right, absolutely. I thank all of our guests for joining us on the broadcast to take us through their perspective of what's happening in the South China Sea.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.